committee on my far right, Colum Eastwood there in the middle, Phelim O'Neill here beside me from the IFA, Sean Haughey on my left here, Niamh Smith TD, sorry, Barry Andrews just to the left, Sean, Niamh Smith TD, Niall Collins and Dan O'Brien. So as you can see, we've got a fantastic panel of speakers lined up. We're going to have some formal introductions on Brexit and then we're going to go to a conversation between our panellists. But I suppose just as your party's Brexit spokesperson these last number of months, it's been an absolute privilege and honour to serve on your behalf and to represent our party at this most crucial time for our country. With just 34 days to go until Brexit. Yes, that's correct, just 34 days remaining. And we still, as of yet, do not know what type of Brexit we will get. But it's important to make the point that there is no such thing as a good Brexit, and whatever Brexit we do get, and whenever it happens, it will mean changes for our country. And it will fundamentally change how we interact, how we trade, and how we work with our closest neighbour and our largest market, the United Kingdom. And it will also have profound implications for Northern Ireland, which I'm sure Colum will touch on as well. So I'm eager to get started with our speakers. I want to first invite to the podium Dan O'Brien, Chief Economist with the IIEA. Dan is also Adjunct Senior Fellow at the School of Politics and International Relations at University College Dublin, a columnist and economic analyst for the Independent Newspaper Group. And for 3 years, from mid-2010, Dan was economic editor at the Irish Times, analysing and commenting on a wide range of Irish, European and global issues. Prior to that, he spent 12 years based in London and Geneva as senior economist and editor at the Economic Intelligence Unit, an arm of the Economist newspaper group. Dan has also worked for the European Commission and as a consultant for the United Nations and Forfas, an Irish government in-house think tank. During his career, in which he has lived and worked in several European countries, Dan has commented frequently in the domestic and international media for broadcasters such as CNN and the BBC, in print for newspapers such as International Herald Tribune and the Financial Times. And his book, Ireland, Europe and the World, was published in October 2009. So without further ado, Dan, I invite you to take the podium and to address our delegates here at the Ard Fheis.
Thank you, Deputy. And just to say, Stephen Donnelly has not got his old job back. Often confused for him. I had to have a little sign saying not Stephen Donnelly on my forehead earlier. Good. So to reiterate the Deputy's comments, Brexit will be, and was always going to be, a strategic nightmare for Ireland. Our nearest neighbour is linked to us in so many ways. There are implications for North-South relations, huge economic implications. Britain's departure will change the nature of the European Union, mostly in ways that will not be advantageous for Ireland. And of course, it will transform British-Irish relations. Almost half of the period since independence, we have both been in the European Union. Britain leaving the European Union will profoundly change the relations between Dublin and London. I'm going to be brief today. I know we're running a bit behind time. Just talk about two things: the implications of a no-deal Brexit in 34 days' time, and a little about the backstop. Make some predictions on a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit. One, that the continental economy will be little affected by Brexit. Despite everything, most continental countries don't trade that much with Britain. Second prediction, the UK economy will be badly affected. And third prediction, this economy will be worse affected than the UK economy. Why is that? We're a small economy and we're a very open economy. We're a much more open economy than the British economy. Our trade, both imports and exports, are 3.3 times more relative to our economy than Britain's trade. Any disruption to that level of trade will be bigger for us, for our economy, than for the UK economy. There's an old joke that says Ireland exports everything it produces and imports everything it consumes. That's not quite true, but it's not far off the mark. We are hugely export dependent. The previous session discussed the agricultural side of things. The British market is still incredibly important for the farming sector. But I'd like to say something that we need to stress. people are more important than producers. Much of the debate around Brexit has been what will happen to exporters. I'm more concerned about what will happen to people who consume things that come into this country. And half of our food imports come from the UK. Even more come through the UK via the land bridge from the continent. Now, if there's a no-deal Brexit, we will be obliged to implement EU rules on the importation of goods. And just something that may be of interest to the farming community, all of the indications from the British side are that at least in the initial period, they will not impose any new taxes on goods coming into the UK. They will wave Irish trucks through because they will want to minimise disruption, and they'll be able to do that. We, on the other hand, will have to impose any obligations, any taxes and checks that the EU side collectively decides to impose. So we won't have the scope just to wave British trucks through. So there's a big import risk if there's a no deal. And let me just give you some further facts. Not only does half of the imported food we have come from the UK, but many of the types of food that are absolutely basic are also heavily import dependent. We import 25 times more potatoes than we export. We import 40 times more flour products than we export. These are basics, and if there's a supply disruption for these, we could have very significant problems. I don't think we talk enough about these risks. We talk a lot about the risks for producers and exporters, which is absolutely right, but we do need to focus on the risks for consumers. Let me also raise another further reason why a no-deal Brexit would be worse for Ireland than for Britain, and this comes to the border issue. If the border is not policed on our side, and if goods are not checked and the tariffs that the EU decides to impose on Britain are not collected on our border, questions will arise over Ireland's participation in the single market. Because if goods come into the single market via Ireland, sooner or later the French and the Dutch and the Belgians are going to start checking Irish goods that hit the continent. And once questions arise about Ireland's participation in the single market, our entire economic model is under threat. And let's be absolutely clear about this. The reason 200,000 jobs are in this country, are people employed by foreign companies, is because we have access to the single market. We don't want to do anything that raises questions about that. And currently, given the uncertainties around what will happen on the border, there are already some questions about that. We're just 34 days away from a lot more questions arising around that piece. Move on briefly to the backstop. Most people support the backstop, and there are good reasons to seek a backstop. In my view, however, the backstop was a big tactical error. It's a little like going to buy a house, and you're talking to somebody about buying the house, and you see a piece of furniture in the house, and you say, we're not closing the deal unless you include that piece of furniture. The person who owns the house says, no, that's a family heirloom, no way I'm going to do that. Becomes a very important issue in the debate, and everything hinges on this piece of furniture. Backstop is a little like that. The government, Irish and the EU side, is absolutely demanding that there is no change to the border. Everybody wants no change to the border, but making such an absolute demand on it has led to where we are today, where the backstop is the principal reason where the talks are looming towards a breakdown. And let's just say it's important to remember that markets and constitutions are linked. Okay? The government's position has been this is a minor thing. Let's remember when we joined the common market in 1973, we had a constitutional referendum. When the single market came into existence and was created in the 1980s, we had a constitutional referendum on that. Northern Ireland, currently under the backstop, would remain within the EU single market. That is a constitutional issue, whichever way you look at it, and it is a serious issue. And on that basis, it's not surprising that this issue has become as contentious as it has. I'm sure we can discuss that further over the course of the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Phelim O'Neill, who's a market specialist with the Irish Farmers Journal. Phelim has spent his entire working career in the meat industry, in Oma Meats from 86 to 97, moving to the Livestock and Meat Commission in Northern Ireland as head of marketing communications, and is now with the Irish Farmers Journal since 2015. So Phelim, I'll hand over to you to address our delegates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just going to make a few brief remarks here to, I suppose, try and generate the thing. I know my fellow Northern Ireland colleague, Colum Eastwood here, he has a big long speech prepared, so I have to create a little bit of space for him. So as a Tyrone man to a Derry man, Colum, I can assure you this is the only favour you'll be getting this year. Dan very eloquently described the impact of Brexit and how it might affect producers coming into Ireland. But it won't surprise anybody in the room, I suppose, coming from the stable of the Irish Farmers Journal, that we look through this very much with the lens that is focused on farmers and rural Ireland. And for us, 90% of agri-produce that comes out of the fields of Ireland, no matter what part of the island it is, has to leave the island. And that's a fantastic thing. It's only, 3 lifetimes ago since we couldn't feed ourselves on this island. So it's an absolutely fabulous thing that we are where we are. Brexit presents the greatest challenge to those exports, certainly in my lifetime and in the lifetime of anyone in this room. Because with all the success we have in developing, and previous speakers in the earlier session referred to 170, 180 countries that we now export to, the main market for so much of our produce is the UK market. Now, some sectors are going to be worse hit than others in farming. And very briefly, to just talk about dairy, you know, we send $1 billion worth of dairy produce to the UK each year, or certainly we did in 2018, it was slightly below the year before. All of our cheddar cheese, the vast majority of our cheddar cheese goes there. But overall, dairy, I suppose, the UK represents the market for a quarter of our exports, 26%. And while it's difficult and it will cause a price fall, the reality is I think dairy can readjust, recalibrate itself and look elsewhere in the world. Pig meat is hugely exposed. 56% of current exports go there. And the reality for our pig farmers, we have that problem, and we also have the issue that 460,000 odd pigs went last year from the border counties in the Republic of Ireland into my own county in Tyrone for processing in Cookstown. You know, a WTO tariff situation takes them out of play. Our sheep meat sector, ironically, and now that we're looking here very much from an all-island basis, it's very much a good news and a bad news story. For my part of the country in the north, and for Colum's part, you know, half the lamb production comes south for processing. If there's a WTO no-deal Brexit, then that is gone. Because whatever the UK might do in terms of WTO tariffs and no-deal situation, the EU will certainly be imposing them. For sheep producers south of the border, there will be something of an opportunity because the UK is the third biggest sheep exporter in the world, sheep meat exporter in the world, so there will be opportunity there. That brings me to beef, and that is the one that is going to be an absolute catastrophe. The biggest catastrophe will be on the southern side of the border, but it will also be a problem for the UK. Now, I heard what, Dan, what you were saying there in terms of UK imposing tariffs. Last week, the UK Minister responsible for Agriculture, Michael Gove, assured the National Farmers Union at their conference that he would not be throwing the UK doors open on agriculture produce, that he would be putting tariffs in place. I suppose in the Farmers Journal we got the dream scoop. We got a look at what the UK Cabinet, the Government Cabinet, is considering in terms of import tariffs. And we reported that in this week's paper. And I suppose, in summary, what they're suggesting is UK currently imports 30% of the beef that it consumes. It only produces 70% of what they eat. Ireland supplies 3/4 of what is imported. And they have decided that they're going to create a tariff-free quota roughly in line with their imports, and the rest will be subject to full WTO tariff, which, by the way, is €3 per kilo in terms of the weight of the product and 12.8% of the value. If that's applied, and if we were sending to UK in WTO tariff situation, it would double the cost of Irish beef. The no tariff situation in many ways is worse, because currently, and we don't think much of the price we're getting for beef here at the moment, but the reality is today in Brazil and Argentina the price is in or around $2.20 a kilo compared to the $3.60, $3.70, $3.80 a kilo that it is here. If the UK creates a tariff that roughly equates to the size of their import market, they are going to be in there. It's just a case of how long it takes them. Will it take them a week? Will it take them a month? Will it take them 3 months? And don't think that standards are going to protect us, because the European Union last year, 2018, imported about 250,000 tonnes of beef from South America, some of it tariff paid, some of it under special EU quotas. So the reality, today, I suppose, as we look at this in an island of Ireland context, given the new dispensation that your party has now with the SDLP in the north, it's something that we have to be very conscious of. That is the scale of the problem that is there. And I suppose we have to look at it and be conscious that there's no such thing as a good Brexit. I totally agree with that comment. It will have serious implications on imports of consumer goods, but for farmers, particularly those involved in the beef and suckler sector, it would be a wipeout. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phelim. Our next speaker needs no introduction. It's a pleasure to share the stage with our partners, the SDLP, and with their leader, Colum Eastwood. At age 27, Colum was appointed Derry's youngest ever mayor in 2010, and he's had a very glittering career ever since, a very successful career ever since. He was elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly in 2011 and was the party's representative on the Committee of the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Colum was elected leader of the SDLP, as you all know, in November 2015. And Colum, I invite you to take to the stage and address our delegates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Lisa, and also thanks, Phelim, for your brevity. I'm actually from a mixed marriage, not Catholic Protestant, Tyrone, Derry, so I have some understanding of Tyrone and a lot of understanding of Derry football, which hasn't stood me in great stead till now. Look, I'm delighted to be here. I'm particularly delighted to be here with so many SDLP colleagues. I don't know what has happened in the last while that there's so many of them down, but we're glad to be here. But whether it's at an Ardèche or a local pub or a family sitting room, I don't think any arena of political conversation can escape talk of Brexit. It is the be-all and end-all of all political thought and energy on both the islands of Britain and Ireland. In the early days of the peace process, my fellow countyman Seamus Heaney famously spoke of history and hope rhyming. Yet Brexit has acted to transform that sentiment into the hope that history will not repeat itself. Speaking in such historical terms is often a politician's favourite currency, and too often just a favourite convenience. However, I think we all know and feel, politicians and people alike, that this is not such a moment. This is different. The Brexit vote was a moment of true change because it was a moment of lasting change. The future chosen by the English and Welsh peoples is not the future chosen by the Irish and Scottish. Brexit is now the ever-shifting water table beneath our feet. It is unsettling all of the political ground which rests upon it. No one should be in any doubt. The instability of Brexit and the instability faced by the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement are inextricably linked. A hard border in Ireland threatens to bring an existential threat to many of our industries in the north. It threatens to position us as a permanent economic backwater. This is particularly true for communities west of the Bann and along the border, communities already economically neglected. All of us instinctively know that this can't be allowed to happen, but all of us must equally understand the reasons why. In 1998, these two great parties, this island and all of our people, chose an agreed future. It was a future based on reconciliation, it was based on deepening cooperation, and it was based on the idea that time would allow old divisions to dissolve into fading memories. It was primarily based on openness, including an open border. So we must be clear and calm in stating that any hardening of the border will be a deliberate violation of our political process by the British government, and they simply have no right. In Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement is sovereign. Both of our parties know this to be true. We were the architects of that agreement. We built it. That agreement belongs to the people of Ireland, and we are the only people with the right to change it. There are increasing numbers of politicians on both our islands carelessly queuing up to rip it apart. We cannot and we will not allow it to happen. But we don't need a new border in Ireland. We can maintain full economic alignment across the island and into European markets. This must be the agreed backstop. The backstop is not our first choice, but it is our ultimate protection. The only people who will actually end up delivering the backstop are the hardened Brexiteers ideologically determined to inflict economic self-harm. But let me also say this. There's no point saying that you oppose Brexit if you're not prepared to turn up and vote against Brexit. This country is in the middle of a national emergency. In Britain, Theresa May's majority is disintegrating before our eyes. How can anyone use the pretense of patriotism to avoid their responsibilities to protect the citizens of this country? I say this to Sinn Féin. It's still an empty formula. Get in there and do your duty, or be forever defined by empty rhetoric. The new partnership between the SDLP and Fianna Fáil is based on a common analysis that business as usual is not an option. Extraordinary times call for more than ordinary measures. Brexit encompasses change on every level. The current political stew is bubbling with issues of identity, belonging and culture. It is no longer just the economy, stupid. Brexit has changed everything in this regard and will continue to change everything. We are coming together to shape that change before us. People across this island are also alive to that change and are speaking openly about it as we approach the centenary of partition, a triumph for some and a tragedy for others. Meaningful reconciliation between the peoples of this island must remain our #1 priority. A new and reconciled Ireland will only ever be built by fully recognising the changing island of today. For our young people especially, the picture of their world is no longer reflected in the murals of our past. Old political certainties and old majorities are no more. On an island of new minorities, the only option is to build a broad coalition for change. That changed Ireland won't be built upon the rubble of our history. It will instead be based on the values we invest in modern nationhood. The purpose of a new Ireland can't be guided by a blind obsession with historic wrongs. It should be about creating opportunities for our emerging generations. A new Ireland capable of delivering prosperity and fairness for all. However, we will only succeed in reaching that new Ireland if we first provide it with definition and detail. And let me say this very clearly. No referendum should be called until that work is done. There will be a special place reserved in hell for those who call for a border poll in Ireland with no plan or no idea to actually win it. In speaking of a new Ireland, we must always be conscious of the peoples with whom we share this island. I am all too aware that talk of a new Ireland risks sending some in our community to the hills, and I'm sensitive to that fact. But I also know that unionism is not limited to, nor is defined by, the politics of fear or division. There are many within the unionist community who are willing to engage and who are willing to explore new possibilities. But we all have a duty to tell our unionist neighbours this. You belong to this place every bit as much as I do. Therefore, you have the very same right to shape the future of this island. They also need to hear that while we want to shape the change ahead, we want to make Northern Ireland work right now. A key role for our new political partnership is to begin that conversation with unionism. We recognise the deep divisions that exist across our communities, and we know that it will take real leadership to begin to bring our communities together. Those of us who believe in a new Ireland need to offer a credible and positive vision. We won't protest our way into one. Those who have cynically framed the inflammatory narrative that unionism as a whole is unchanging, doesn't believe in rights and can't be worked with, those people need to be faced down. That cannot be the basis of our vision. This is not 1968, and we are not second-class citizens anymore. I, for one, am tired of hearing that argument. We diminish ourselves by its repetition, and we diminish the progress which has been secured by previous generations. The point is this: if we can't provide a place of opportunity and belonging for our unionist neighbours, then it simply isn't worth having. For over 2 years now, politics in the North has been locked in a cycle of frustration and failure. But we should never give up hope, because history tells us that cycles are there to be broken. We know this because 21 years ago, the Good Friday Agreement broke the cycle of conflict and division, which had cast a shadow upon the Irish and British relationship for some 800 years. Now is not the moment to give up on the agreement that our two parties were so key to delivering. Now is the moment to fully embrace it. Problems aren't solved by shouting at each other. They're not solved by shouting slogans over a wall. Our difficulties won't be resolved by setting preconditions for government or preconditions for even talking about being in government. We need to engage with unionism now, and we need to engage with them in the institutions that were designed for such engagement. I particularly want to say this today. Nationalism on this island must not be seduced or misled into the narrative that Stormont is a convenience but not a necessity. There is no hope of reconciliation on this island without an assembly at Stormont. There is no hope of delivering integrated economic and social progress across this island without an assembly in Stormont. There is no way of fully protecting our people against the devastating consequences of Brexit without an assembly at Stormont. For any real Republican, there is no pathway towards a new Ireland without an assembly at Stormont. Both the SDLP and Fianna Fáil are coming together to ensure that we return to the vision that we imagined and built some 21 years ago. We will fight to ensure that government returns to the North and that our people are no longer left voiceless and powerless. On my journey down this morning, I was looking through the Clár for this Ardèche. This evening, I noticed the two events will be celebrated and commemorated: the establishment of the First Dáil and the legacy and life of Taoiseach Sean Lemass. There is something appropriate in the fact that historic commemorations and current historic events are chiming and converging. But whatever happens with Brexit, and whether it's 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or now, the choice remains the exact same. The Irish and British peoples across this island can retreat from each other, or we can again choose to work, live, and govern together. Thank you.
Colum, thank you very much for that very strong and clear message that Brexit is a changing issue. It is a change that the people of Northern Ireland, the people of Scotland, nobody on this island voted for Brexit, but yet we are left dealing with the repercussions of Brexit. And it is important that we work as an all-island community, all communities together, to try and buffer and protect our people against the worst possible outcomes of Brexit. And I think, Colum, you hit the nail on the head when you said that that cannot be done on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland without its executive and without its assembly. And I think it is nothing short of a disgrace that more than 2 years the people of Northern Ireland have not had their parliament up and running, that the Brexit minority of the DUP have been the sole voice in Westminster for Northern Ireland, and that is on the heads of Sinn Féin and Sinn Féin only. And I made remarks earlier this week that Sinn Féin right now are the best friends the hard Brexiteers ever had. No government in Northern Ireland, and this week they wanted to collapse the government here in the Republic as well. And the best they could do when key votes were taking place in Westminster a couple of weeks ago was to stand on the steps outside and record a video of their opposition. That's the level of representation the nationalist community are getting from Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. And as Colum said, they will answer for that eventually. Just in terms of, I suppose, the political aspects to it, Sean, you're our European Affairs spokesman. And I know you and I have sat in the Dáil Chamber on many occasions and we've discussed this particular issue, but I suppose from your own perspective, how do you see us as an island moving forward beyond Brexit? And more importantly, how do you now see our place will be within the European Union beyond Brexit?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa. It's a great honour to be the Fianna Fáil spokesperson on European affairs, and this is a very challenging time. Brexit was a wake-up call, there's no doubt about that, and the election of President Trump in the United States was a wake-up call as well. I think there is a mood there that the EU institutions must become closer to the citizens. There is a debate underway now throughout the European Union in relation to the future of the European Union. And that is a very important debate, and it's a debate that Ireland must play a leading role in, particularly in the context of Brexit. So I think it would be very important for us to state that we want to be at the heart of Europe. We believe in liberal democratic values. We reject the populism of the left and the right, which gave rise to Brexit, and we will be there. It was my grandfather, Sean Lemass, in the late 50s and early 60s, started the process of joining the European Union, and successive Fianna Fáil Taoiseach have been very involved in enhancing the European Union, and that's where we want to be, and we want to reject the populists of the left and the right, and we want, because we know what's in the best interests of our citizens is a functioning European Union close to the citizens. So as I say, Brexit was the wake-up call. We must respond to that, and we all must get involved in the debate on the future of Europe taking place at this time.
Thank you very much, Sean. I just want to touch upon something that you said, Dan, just in terms of the issue around the border. And I know you say that the backstop is a constitutional issue for Northern Ireland, but actually I think the two have become conflated, and that the constitutional position of Northern Ireland is governed by the Good Friday Agreement. But I think it's interesting the remarks you make around where checks might have to take place and what Ireland could be facing into in the event that we refuse to do checks on the island, what the French might actually do, or other European member states. And I suppose just in that context, what do you see as our options, and what do you see as being, I suppose, the most likely outcome in that regard? Because the Taoiseach, when pressed, the most he could muster when he wasn't too busy telling Shane Ross to be quiet, was that there might be checks somewhere in the sea. That's the level of detail we've had from Simon Coveney on this particular issue.
Look, I've always thought Brexit is about damage limitation. It's not about damage elimination. We cannot eliminate the damage for us from the decision the British have taken. And how do we limit the damage? In my view, if Britain does leave, the best we can hope for is to get a guarantee from the British not to police the northern side of the border, because I think that is the really big problem. Just the taxi driver coming up here today I was with is a GAA man. He said he remembers times when guns were put in the window of his car when he was crossing the border. That is really what people don't want. Now, if there is no policing on the northern side of the border, but there are some checks for goods on the southern side, that may be the best achievable outcome. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves about that. We have big choices. If we don't do that, we will be out of the EU single market. And that will have economic implications for the entire island, and it will also make unity, if that comes closer, more difficult to achieve, because if we're poorer, we will have less resources to finance unity.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And just, I suppose, Barry, just to come to you on this, as our Dublin candidate for the European elections, and hopefully soon to be our MEP here in Dublin, your constituency is home to Dublin Port. 83% of our goods come in and out through Dublin Port, obviously Rosslare being our second largest port. And presumably, given that Brexit is unlikely to be resolved by the time you'll take your seat, hopefully, it is one of the key issues that you, as a member of the European Parliament representing Ireland and the Dublin constituency, will be dealing with. And I suppose, how do you see your role in terms of advocating for, I suppose, keeping trade flowing, protecting supply chains, and I suppose trying to work with the UK as best we can to try and keep those doors open?
Well, I mean, I don't want to assume anything, but certainly the complexion of the European Parliament after these European Parliament elections is going to be very different to anything we've seen before. The EPP and the Social Democrats have shared power in the European Parliament for the last 2 or 3 decades. There will be a lot of people who have a negative attitude to the EU coming into the European Parliament, who are from Hungary, from Poland, from Italy, where the government is a populist nationalist government and very critical of the European Union. So everything is going to change in the European Parliament. But the key point is that the group that we are aligned to, ALDE, will be one of the three centrist, if you like, parties that would probably be influential in the formation of the key positions, the chairs of the committees. So Fianna Fáil, if we get 4 MEPs elected, we would be the largest national delegation in ALDE. So the potential for us to be influential is enormous, but it's absolutely critical because, as you know, the European Union is organised in regional alliances. The Baltic Group, the Nordic Group, the Mediterranean, Benelux, and Ireland is in that environment very exposed, not just geographically, not having a hinterland, but also under certain issues like migration, like climate even, and particularly corporate tax. So the formation of alliances to maintain Irish influence in the EU after Brexit is one of the key issues that each one of the 13 Irish MEPs elected will have to discharge very closely. And the final point I'd say, Lisa, is also because there will be no representation of the north of Ireland. I think the alliance that we have with the SDLP gives us an opportunity to articulate the concerns that Northern Ireland will have in terms of the European Parliament. So that's a really interesting consequence of this new partnership.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Barry. And just before we move to some of our local election candidates, Niamh, you're one of our TDs in a border constituency. You represent Cavan Monaghan. And I suppose listening to what Dan was saying there in terms of potential checks, I'm sure many of your constituents, that's still very fresh in their minds. Good Friday Agreement, we celebrated 20 years last year. Niamh, what are you hearing from your constituents?
I'd agree with you, Lisa. In fact, I'd go as far as saying it's quite raw still. We've had 20 years of peace and reconciliation, and that's certainly not anything that people in Cavan Monaghan take for granted. We can unfortunately vividly remember going through those checks, you know, as young kids ourselves, our parents, if you were going to Belfast, something like that, it was the rarity that you would take the opportunity to go because people lived in fear and they didn't cross the border. And I would have to say, like, it has taken that 20 years of peace and reconciliation building, which has been most evident in counties like Cavan, Monaghan, Louth, where peace funding, leader funding has been so influential, so important. Like, I live in a county, Lisa, where the Protestant children went to a Protestant school and the Catholic children went to Catholic schools. And that is no more. Children are mixing through each other, parents are mixing through each other, they're mixing in different clubs, social groups as well, which has been hugely, hugely important. And like often, well, throughout this Brexit, if you like, discussion and debate that's been going on, we've had a lot of European visitors come to Cavan Monaghan just to see how frictionless the border is. And they are actually very struck by that, you know, there has been two very different, distinct parliaments at play here and operating, and that we can move frictionless from one border to the other. Like you can cross the border between north and south 3 or 4 times to just travel from Cavan Town to Monaghan Town, and that's something we treasure and something we feel very, very precious about. And I think Colum's speech here today has been very, very welcome because it is talk of reconciliation, it is talk of peace, it is talk about representing our people, Catholic or Protestant, Unionist or Nationalist, and that is the kind of conversation, that is the kind of discussions we need to be having, not ones about protests or collapsing governments.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Niamh. I just wanted to bring in Deputy Niall Collins. Niall, you're our foreign affairs spokesman, so I suppose you're looking at this from more maybe the geopolitical sphere and I suppose the wider European context. And I mean, it's no secret that the United Kingdom are a strong ally in terms of security and defence at an EU level. How much do you think that's playing into the Brexit negotiations, and how much of an ace card do you think the United Kingdom are relying on that issue?
Well, the United Kingdom at this point in the process are trying to get into brinkmanship and they're trying to create a scenario where the Irish government will feel isolated or threatened, and they're hoping to try and bounce Ireland and by virtue or by extension the European Union into altering the agreement which has been entered into. But what frustrates me hugely is the ongoing drift and the way that the Irish government is sleepwalking through this process, because as late as Thursday night, for example, I heard the Minister for Agriculture say that the Irish government and the European Union stands ready and willing to support the Irish farmers, for example, the beef sector, the Irish producers and the food processing industries, but yet there was no detail. Again, we had Taoiseach Simon Coveney at our committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, on Thursday of last week to discuss the omnibus legislation which was published just this week. Again, very light in detail. So what we find is that the whole approach, their approach was hoping against hope, thinking that it wouldn't come to this juncture, and now that we're at this juncture, they've been found wanting in terms of the detail. So I think our party's approach has been right. We have been calling them out, particularly on their lack of preparedness. We've heard in the earlier session in relation to agriculture. I'll give you another example. For example, the medtech industry, which is huge in Ireland, provides a lot of high-end jobs. 40% of the product are the goods and the services which are produced by the medtech industry in Ireland, which are global corporations, are licensed, receive their certification through the United Kingdom. Those products will not be allowed to be sold or used anywhere in the European Union if we have a crash-out Brexit. So the government is leaving it right down to the wire, and the uncertainty that that has created right around the country for the last number of weeks, which has been intensifying now, is really, really staggering. So I think the fact that we have been to the fore in terms of calling them out, in terms of the lack of preparedness, will be to our credit. And I want to echo what you have said, Lisa, and what the other speakers have said in terms of our links with the SDLP. We are giving an all-Ireland voice to our links and our partnership, and I welcome Colum Eastwood here, and personally I'm delighted with the partnership which we have forged with the SDLP, because what you have in Colum Eastwood is a leader, and you have a party who are prepared to stand up for the community, for the rights of the community in the north of Ireland, where others have ran away. They want to be involved in politics in 3 jurisdictions, but they don't want to take responsibility. In Fianna Fáil, we have demonstrated we want to take responsibility on a whole host of levels, and we've done it to our cost before, and many would argue that we're doing it to our cost in the recent political times, but we are doing the right thing by the country in the national interest, and we will continue to do that. That is what Colum is continuing to do, and I'm proud to be part of Fianna Fáil, and I'm sure you're proud to be part of Fianna Fáil in doing that also. Thank you.
Now, delegates, I'm going to start by calling on some of our local election candidates to address you for a couple of minutes each, and we'll get time then, hopefully, to come back to our panel for some closing remarks. So, first speaker is Councillor Paul Foley from Rathfarnham. You're welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And just on behalf of the ordinary members of Fianna Fáil, I'd also like to extend the welcome to Colum and the rest of your colleagues from the SDLP. You're very, very welcome here today. As well as being a councillor in the Rathfarnham Temple Oak area, I'm also a small business owner in the logistics sector, and specifically shipping. So I'm hoping today to give a kind of boots on the ground view of Brexit. Irish trade worth tens of billions each year, and the delivery of those products is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year business. Dublin Port alone serves an average of 22 vessels every single day, with freight that, if it was queued end to end, would stretch for 25 miles, and that's just Dublin Port. We need the government to immediately recognise the need for a frictionless border solution, to keep traffic flowing, not just for the shipping industry, but for everyone who relies on the produce in the lorries. It has been bandied about in the media that hauliers, instead of using the UK as a land bridge, could just use a Rosslare to France route. But the reality is the infrastructure for a busy port, not to mention the road infrastructure around a port, can take decades to get right, and this work hasn't even started. A 25-mile queue into Rosslare, just to put it in perspective, would stretch back to Main Street, Enniscorthy. A 25-mile queue into Dublin would be just shy of Drogheda. The reality is it would more likely clog up the M50 and the city centre every single day. And many people are predicting a negative effect on our economy and the UK economy over the next number of years, But the effect on the shipping industry is more likely to be immediate and instant. The transport sector is no longer thinking about Brexit issue in the theoretical. It is very much in the practical. It is taking orders currently for produce the far side of the Brexit deadline, so it has to think about it in the practical. It has to ask, what route am I going to take? Will the produce spoil if I miss the ferry? If I'm late to a delivery address, will I be turned away? And lastly, who is going to pay these extra costs? Without a frictionless solution, our world gets just a little bit bigger, and in my opinion, everybody is likely to suffer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Our next speaker is all the way from Cork, Dr. Rosarie Griffin.
Gurmil Malgus, Deputy Chambers, and it's my pleasure to be here today from the East Cork Constituency, Middleton Youghal electoral area. Before I commence, let me start with a confession. Although UCC is my alma mater, of which I am well proud, I am also, in part at least, a product of the UK third-level sector. After graduating from UCC, where I now work as a lecturer and researcher, I was fortunate enough to study at Oxford University for my doctorate, courtesy of the British taxpayer. I made many friends there, some of whom I still keep in touch with to this day. So it is more in sorrow than in anger that we prepare for the imminent departure of our nearest neighbours from the EU. But let us be clear about this. We in Ireland did not ask for Brexit. We do not want Brexit. Brexit will cause severe damage to many of our businesses, as we've already heard, both north and south of the border. However, along with the inevitable carnage that we expect to ensue that our previous speaker mentioned, there may also be some opportunities. And higher education may be one of the few areas that we can see some long-term potential benefits. Why? Because post-Brexit, Ireland will be one of the only English-speaking nations left in the EU. While there will be undoubtedly short-term disruptions, there may well be long-term benefits, and we must grab these unashamedly with both hands. Our higher education sector urgently needs to prepare for both the challenges and, equally important, the opportunities that lie ahead. And it is here that the government needs to be brought to task. For how can the third-level sector hope to prosper when it has been systematically starved of funds for the last number of years? Never mind competing on a global level, we currently struggle to make ends meet as higher education budgets have been slashed in the last decade by an average of 50%. For instance, in UCC, to give a case example where I work and also where I was an elected governor for 2 terms of office, our core budget went from 90 million 5 years ago to 30 million today. And we have to make up that shortfall in research funding. Now, this is a zero-sum game. Retired staff have not been replaced, and those that have been replaced are often put on precarious contracts. The 2017 Castles report estimated that the higher education sector needs urgent funding in the region of 500 million just to bring it back to where it was. And this figure has since risen to 600 million, given the projected rise in demographics of students who expect to attend third-level education in the near future. So when it comes to education, let us not be under any illusions what is at stake here. What is at stake is soft power. So what is soft power? Soft power is something that both Ireland and the UK have traditionally excelled at. It comes from our culture, our films, our music, our wonderful literature, and yes, our educational systems as well. We punch in Ireland well above our weight in so many of these areas. But now, the UK is willing to put their soft power at risk as they prepare to transition from the Great Britain of Shakespeare and Churchill to the Little Britain of Johnson and Farage. Let me be clear, we do not wish to beggar our neighbours. However, Brexit does give Ireland the opportunity to supplant the UK as being the leading European destination for international third-level students seeking an exceptional education through the medium of English. Can I conclude? In conclusion?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Sorry. So, in conclusion then, some of these students will stay and work in Ireland, raising families, paying taxes and enjoying full access to the EU. Others will return to their home countries and be the business and political leaders of the future. When the time comes for their countries and companies to invest, then they will remember with fondness and affection the time they spent in Ireland and act accordingly. And that, my dear friends, is soft power in action. So to conclude...
Yeah, okay. Councillor Keith Henry.
Thank you.
Accordia, Brexit poses the greatest challenge to virtually every facet of Irish life on this island, be it agriculture, education, trade in the haulage sector, to the free movement of people, goods and services. As a public representative in Sligo, I see the concern and impact that Brexit is already having on the ground. Businesses are cautious in their approach pending the outcome of the EU-UK negotiations. Local authority budgets, measures and policies all go through the process of Brexit proofing in anticipation of an outcome of these discussions. Our farming sector, which we have just discussed, is the backbone of our rural economies, and it continues to suffer under the uncertain cloud of Brexit. And yet, all that Fine Gael and Ard Fheis can do is offer a cheap gaff about eating less red meat, at a time when the beef sector is crying out for help. 2 years on the negotiations, we are no more certain about anything than at the beginning of the process. As a secondary school teacher myself, some of my students expressed concern about wanting to study in the 6 counties or in Britain. Will they be charged above the current EU student rate? And what of their counterparts who wish to study on this side of the border? The Leader and Peace programmes, which have done so much for our border communities to develop and reconcile with their past, are also up in the air under these discussions. All of these are worrying uncertainties. But the one certain thing is that Fianna Fáil has put the interest of the whole island first in its extension of the confidence and supply arrangement, much as it is difficult for some of us to stomach. The Sinn Féin party, who likes to claim that they are the only speakers for the whole of Ireland, have done little to assist the situation we are in. Calls for border polls, the Stormont crisis and the punch and judy politics they display in Dáil Éireann demonstrate that their concern is party politics and not people. Fianna Fáil helped to bring peace to this island and in turn to remove the border arrangements, and I have no doubt that we will continue to work with the interested and progressive parties such as the SDLP to ensure that we go nowhere near the days of our troubled past. It is thanks to the courageous and patriotic nature of our party that we do not have the chaotic scenes similar to those taking place in Westminster at the moment. And I urge us all to wear the team jersey and ensure that Ireland is protected at all costs. Gurmila Mahabit.
Thank you very much, Keith, and to Councillor Seamus Butler from Longford.
Thank you very much, Carla. Oireachtas members, delegates. As the Catholic said, I'm from Longford, up Mullinachta. And my main concern with Brexit is the effect it will have on the SME sector. I'm in my 33rd year of the ownership of a small to medium-sized business. The SME sector has been treated as the Cinderella of the business community under this and the last Fine Gael-led governments. Yet 98% of all Irish businesses are, by definition, small to medium-sized operations. Furthermore, it's not just the relatively few SMEs that export, but the vast majority of these companies that are confined to the local and domestic markets. While I believe that a hard Brexit is unlikely, it still looms as a possibility with the British body politic crumbling and fragmenting on a daily basis. The withdrawal agreement, including the backstop, will not be renegotiated, and either the House of Commons comes to its senses and accepts that, or the consequences will be far worse than we can imagine. let us suppose there is acceptance of the withdrawal agreement and there's no extension of from the 29th of March. The next day, things will not suddenly change on the 30th of March, that is, assuming they continue in the customs union for the time being. However, there will then be further negotiations between the UK and the EU to shape how the future relationship will unfold. Whereas our SMEs, who are EI clients, which my own company is, we export primarily at the moment to France and French territories, the indigenous SMEs have no support in identifying what products and inputs are UK sourced and therefore vulnerable to future supply constraints and possible tariffs. Of course, we have the playbook for Brexit from the currency crisis in 1990-91. People forget that. I was in business then, when our Irish punt soared in value as sterling crashed. My own company saw 40% of our sales disappearing virtually overnight. We survived and ended up in big markets in Asia as diversification. Does this government know or care about the Irish Indigenous SME sector? The question arises as to what is our plan as the Fianna Fáil party in the face of Brexit to stand up and defend Irish SMEs and champion the small and underprivileged when their need is greatest.
Thank you very much, Seamus. And to our final contributor, to Emer Brennan from Monaghan.
Emer Brennan is my name and I'm a candidate in Monaghan LEA. When the results of the Brexit referendum were announced in 2016, I recall the initial shockwaves across Monaghan, giving way to people seeking clarity on what they had to plan for. There was always an expectation that when Brexit took place in whatever form, that we would be ready. Unfortunately, it appears that the government has, until very recently, adopted it and it'll be all right on the night approach to preparing for the worst case scenario. But this is not show business. It's real life, real businesses, real communities, real people. People who cross the border every day for trade, for work, for family reasons, to look after livestock, and a myriad of other reasons. Tolkien said, "It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him." Brexit is that live dragon, and we have been living near him for over 2 years now. A hard Brexit is a nasty, real, fire-breathing specimen. That dragon could be wide awake in just 34 days' time, unless an alternative is both negotiated and ratified before then. Monaghan and other towns like Dundalk have worked hard to keep their heads above water over recent years. They have put in place very successful town voucher schemes and other initiatives. Their success has seen a demonstration of the loyalty of local people to their towns. However, this week, retailers' groups have warned that a no-deal Brexit with tariffs on goods of up to 45% will cause price hikes and a reduced supply of goods that will inevitably be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. What then for local towns? I recall a Fianna Fáil Brexit conference in Dundalk, I see Seamus here, over 2 years ago, where it was pointed out that many bigger businesses had expertise in preparing themselves for adverse fluctuations in currency, but that small businesses had not. Is there any help for them now, or will they just be left to sink or swim? As things stand, our level of preparedness is at best uncertain, and there is a real concern among businesses and communities about what we're facing into. There are forecasts of a $1 billion plus hole in the public finances, job losses, Indigenous companies and certain sectors being hit. I don't know, but I don't feel confident. Do you? Every time I see the Taoiseach and his ministers on TV, I always feel that they have their fingers crossed behind their backs, hoping that it'll all turn out okay. But this government, fortunately for them and for us, has been given the space to plan without worrying about an election. So they have no excuse. Right now, we will have to hope that there will be an extension of the Article 50 process until mid-year. This is clearly time we badly need, especially for our border towns and communities. Gar maigah.
Thank you very much, Emer. And Emer touched upon a very important point, and that is the role that our party has played in ensuring stability and giving government the space and the latitude that they need to see Brexit through and get the job done. And even with that space and that latitude and that flexibility, they still haven't managed to prepare our country to where it needs to be. We still don't have basic things like a traffic management plan for Dublin Port. We don't know what financial aid package will be available to our beef sector, as Phelim touched upon earlier. Basic questions remain unanswered with 34 days to go. As Niall pointed out, the omnibus legislation was published yesterday. With 35 days to go till Brexit, they finally got around to publishing the emergency legislation that our country needs to ensure basic things like continuity of healthcare provision north and south in this island. Next week, the House will begin debating that legislation, and only because Fianna Fáil that we will ensure the space is given in parliamentary time and that we do everything we can and that we need to do to get that legislation through. Were it not for the goodwill of our party, that wouldn't be happening. So I think we can hold our heads proud for the role that we have played in pulling on the green jersey, as has been referred to so many times, and in looking out for the interests of our country and ensuring that we have stability here when we need it. I want to just go back to our panel briefly before we wrap up and to bring in my colleague Declan Brannock, who's a border fox in the constituency of Louth. Declan and I actually don't read into that comment. Declan and I was going to say share an office. We don't share an office. We're on the same line of offices. So myself and Declan are actually neighbours in Leinster House. And we discuss Brexit pretty much on a daily basis when we are in Leinster House. And I know, Declan, it's of a particular concern to you in a border constituency, not just the business community, but also the farming community. And again, that real pressing issue of the border.
Thank you, Lisa. Firstly, I'd just like to reiterate the welcome for Colum Eastwood, and indeed, particularly for his many colleagues who are here today. I find that I've worked very, very closely with many of them on many cross-border issues during the year, and I really look forward to a revving up and increasing of that partnership. I suppose, in answer to your question, Lisa, we did, as you said, we got the landmark legislation yesterday, yet we haven't solved the issue of the land bridge. And as others have said, with 34 days to go, I think there are many landmines along the way, but hopefully we won't end up with a fortified land border. I was born in '58, 10 years before the reintroduction of the Troubles. I lived through the impact that membership of the EU gave us right through the 70s, where people became envious of our road structure when we used to look north in envy at theirs before we joined the EU, and to see the impact that has given to us in terms of road infrastructure, and indeed, you name it. Niamh Smith referred to the importance of the peace and Interreg funding to communities. But as spokesperson for cross-border and cross-border cooperation, I just want to say that the unity that is needed, in my view, in the run-up to the next number of days, is that unity of purpose that I see that the SDLP have, indeed a unity of people and a unity of prosperity. And I think unity of land will come with that. I was delighted to hear Colum make reference to the issue of having to resolve and reconcile our differences with all on this island and to create that island for all. And I look forward to doing that with you, Lisa, and with my fellow colleagues over the coming months and hopefully years.
Thanks very much, Declan. Phelim, I just want to bring you back in on the beef issue, because a lot of our speakers have touched upon the agricultural, I suppose, dimension to all of this, and we had the agricultural section on the stage just before we came on. You might just go into a little bit more detail, just what exactly it means if we have a no-deal Brexit and the UK revert to World Trade Organisation rules, what that does to beef.
Well, there's basically two potential outcomes to that. One is that they impose a full WTO tariff, which would have the effect of doubling the cost of Irish beef on the UK market, and that effectively prices it out of it. It would just simply, we would experience a price hit and crash at a farm gate level in that case. The alternative that the UK has, and the one that they're looking at, is that they can go for a zero or a low tariff option. If they do that, they have to apply it to the whole world. It's not just to their former trading partners in the European Union. And in that occasion, we get hit too. It's the double-edged sword, and both sides of it cuts Irish agriculture, beef in particular. If they go to a zero or a low tariff quota for part of the product that's used in the UK, the 30% that they import, well, then that puts Irish beef in head-to-head competition with the cheap producing countries of South America, such as Brazil and Argentina, where the cost of production is a fraction of what it is here. Their market price today is $2.20 a kilo, and anyone that's involved with beef farming in this room knows that the price that we have, which is $1.50 a kilo better than that, simply isn't sustainable. I suppose the final point I would want to make in the context of that border, we in the Farmers' Journal, whenever the Brexit vote went past, we would have dispatched a couple of people to, I suppose, two of the most seamless borders that would exist in the world between the most friendly nations in the world. Norway, who are outside the European Union and outside the customs arrangement, and Sweden, and Switzerland and Germany. Switzerland and Norway, two non-EU members that have very close relations with the EU. In both those cases, commercial traffic requires to stop at a border crossing, and there's a delay of about 10 to 15 minutes. On the Irish border, we have 13,500 commercial vehicles crossing each day. Now, we can work and find methods of at source or at destination, but the reality of life is that there has to be some sort of border infrastructure if the UK is in a different tariff arrangement from the rest of the EU.
Thanks, Phelim. Dan, I just want to come back to you on the issue of the land bridge, and I think it was Councillor Foley referred to queues at our ports, and I mean, I think it made for sobering listening, Dan, when you spoke about the potential for food shortages or an implication to our food supply here in the island. I've been to Dublin Port twice myself this year with some of my colleagues from the Oireachtas, and they're doing a lot of work there in terms of expanding the facilities to allow for checks to take place if they're needed. So they're doing what our government aren't doing. They're actually doing prudent planning and planning for all eventualities. But the point that was made to me was that they have 260 hectares of space at Dublin Port, whereas Dover has 25 hectares. They don't actually have the space in Dover to put in the physical infrastructure if they need it. And it was said to me in no uncertain terms, in a very clear way, Dover only works because of the single market and the customs union. And I suppose my question is, if we get the inevitable delays that we're expecting at Dover, and I don't expect there'll be a separate queue for Irish trucks, in fact I think we'll be left waiting if the UK trucks need to get through quicker, where does that leave us, or what do you see as a potential solution? Because the land bridge, as Declan pointed out, remains unresolved.
Yeah, I think that's it's a very important point. The British, if there is a crash out, could blame us and actually discriminate against Irish trucks at the Dover end, causing difficulties in accessing the continental market. And remember, the EU26 is our biggest market. Many people in Britain still think that Britain is our biggest market. It's not. The US has even overtaken the UK as a market. So Britain is now our third biggest market. So that has there's a huge implication there. The one upside of this is that I've spoken to many people in business, and they're not sitting on their hands. People in business are looking at alternative solutions to get around it. Some companies can't take the direct route to the continent, for example, but some can, and they're moving in that direction. Some are talking about flying. In terms of importers, some importers are saying, let's import less from the UK, diversify to continental importers. So something good is that many companies are preparing, are looking at alternatives, are becoming less dependent on the UK market.
Thank you, Dan. I just want to, I mean, we're out of time as has happened at these events. And look, with Brexit, we could be here all night talking about Brexit and the different aspects to it. But Colum, as our partners and working together on this issue, I just want to give the final word to you on this, because, I think you sent a very strong message to the unionist community and the nationalist community and to all of our delegates here today that this is an all-island issue. and I suppose we're very pleased to be able to work with you on Brexit as that all-island issue.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I mean, I've probably taken up enough of your time, but I think it's been very important to see Fianna Fáil taking a responsible attitude towards Brexit and towards, and it's very difficult, I understand that, when you're in Dáil Éireann and the traditional rivalry that's there, but this is a national emergency. This is a crisis, and we're nearly at the end of it, potentially. But I can just tell you what people on the other side of the border are feeling. They're feeling a sense of real panic. They're very, very concerned. I live a mile from the border. I grew up with British soldiers putting guns through windows as well, and actually been in and around our streets too. People, without trying to exaggerate the concern here, if we have border infrastructure, it will have to be secured, because there are still people who want to exploit any opportunity to create mayhem on our streets. It's not that long ago, 3 weeks, that there was a car bomb in my own city of Derry. Any border infrastructure is a threat and a risk to us going back in a very, very dangerous way. So I would just ask that people stay firm, stay strong. This is not just about trade. This has an enormous impact on all of the peace and progress that we've made, and kind of stick with us. People in the north are relying upon the political establishment of all parties in the south to stay strong and to stay with the citizens, and that's what we are, the citizens just across the border. So I'm very grateful for the support so far, and it's important that we stay together. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll wrap up our Brexit session. I think a very important note to finish on, the issue of the border, how important it is. There cannot be a return to a hard border because it does represent a target. We are united on that front with the SDLP, and it is our party policy. So just to say thank you to our guest speakers, to Colum, to Phelim, to Dan, to my colleagues, to Declan, to Sean, Barry, Niamh and Niall, and to all of you delegates for being here this afternoon to engage in our discussion and to listen to all of the speakers, and to all of our local election candidates as well, to wish them the very best in the local elections, and to you, Barry, in the European elections, and to our other candidates as well. And finally, delegates, thank you very much for your attention.